Welcome to Our Voice of Maine, a podcast brought to you by the CCSM. We are here to share our stories, struggles, and successes in navigating the Maine mental health system. Join us as we explore the challenges and triumphs, the services and supports, and the power of peer connection. I'm Sarah Savage Bellavance, your host for Our Voice of Maine. Let's dive in. Today's episode is something a little different and really special. This is a part 1 of a 3-part series focused on the powerful connection between art and mental health in the peer community. We usually stick to 1 episode per topic, but believe it or not, we had too many stories to share. So we put together a collection of 3 episodes, each featuring conversations with peers and their unique connection to art. Each guest brings their own lived experience, but they all share something in common: the deep impact that creativity and expression have had in their journeys. Whether it's painting, poetry, sculpture, or protest art, these stories speak to the ways art helps us heal, connect, and advocate. Today, we have a special co-host with us today, Brittany Lawrence, who is one of the 3 podcast team members and the artist behind the amazing guest illustrations that you see on our show. Brittany has been an artist since she was very young and shares that a large part of her journey in life and mental health has involved artwork. So thank you for joining us today on the show, Brittany.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this one. Today we're diving into a topic that really hits home for me, and I bet for a lot of others: the powerful connection between art and mental health. People have always used art to show what it's like to be human, the good stuff and the tough stuff, and everything in between. The idea that getting creative can make us feel better? That's not a new concept either. It's always been a part of who we are as humans and often as a community. In Maine, this connection has a quiet yet significant history. While the explicit term art therapy might be a more recent construct, the foundational principles were certainly present in early institutions. Consider the Augusta Mental Health Institute, which opened its doors in Augusta in 1840. It was considered a pioneering facility that embraced the philosophy of moral treatment, a progressive approach championed by reformers like Dorothea Dix. It moved away from punitive methods and instead emphasized humane care, the restorative power of fresh air, and crucially, engagement in constructive activities as pathways to recovery. While our scientific understanding of mental health has evolved dramatically since those days, the core belief that meaningful engagement, including creative endeavors, could profoundly aid healing was a cornerstone even then. Patients were often encouraged to participate in activities like gardening, music, and various crafts, recognizing the therapeutic value of purpose and expression. As Maine grew, so too did its rich and diverse artistic communities. From historic art colonies like Ogunquit and Monhegan, where artists found inspiration and camaraderie, to the rise of craft schools like the Haystack Mountain School of Crafts, which was founded in 1950 and quickly grew into the preeminent center for craft education, emphasizing creative thinking and personal expression through various mediums. Monhegan Island, for instance, became one of America's oldest and most influential artist colonies, attracting renowned painters from the mid-19th century onward, drawn to its dramatic coastal landscape. Our state has long been a fertile ground for creative expression, and within these vibrant communities, countless individuals have undoubtedly discovered profound solace, resilience, and a unique sense of self through their artistic practice. Whether it was formally recognized as therapeutic or simply a deeply personal journey of healing, the act of creation itself, the immersion and process, often provided an unacknowledged but powerful form of well-being. Today, we understand with greater clarity how art can be a profound tool in the recovery and healing process. It's not about creating a masterpiece, but about the process itself, the release, the exploration, the nonverbal communication of what can sometimes feel inexpressible. Art provides a unique pathway to process emotions, reduce stress, build self-awareness, and even foster a sense of accomplishment and connection. For me personally, art has been an unwavering anchor during periods of intense mental health strain. There have been countless moments when words felt utterly inadequate, when the internal landscape was a chaotic storm too overwhelming to articulate. In those times, picking up a paintbrush, sketching in a notebook, writing poetry, singing a song, or even just losing myself in the colors and textures of a craft project has been nothing short of a lifeline. It's a powerful way to externalize the internal, to give shape and form to the formless, and to carve out a quiet, sacred space within myself, even when the world around me feels overwhelmingly loud and challenging. It helps me stay connected to my authentic self, that core sense of me that can sometimes feel obscured or lost amidst the complexities of mental health challenges. On today's episode, we're honored to feature voices from both the Maine mental health peer community and the art community, who will share their own insights and experiences on how art has played a vital role in their journeys. We'll explore the how and why behind art's therapeutic power, offering a deeper understanding of this incredible resource. So join us as we explore the healing canvas of art.
Natasha Mayers has been called the heart and soul of activist art in Maine. And once you hear her story, you'll understand why. She supervised more than 600 school and community murals across the state of Maine, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. And for over 45 years, she's been a staple in her local Whitefield 4th of July parade, creating floats that inspire and engage. Natasha has worked with countless communities, including immigrants, refugees, the homeless, and peers in mental health, and has spent over 40 years supporting mental health consumers through art. First at AmHigh, and later at the Link Center and the Waterville Social Clubs. She says that working with consumers kept her honest in her art. She is also the founder of ARRT, ARRT, that is, the Artist Rapid Response Team, and editor-in-chief of the Maine Arts Journal. Natasha uses her art to uplift voices and advocate for social justice. We're honored to share this conversation with Natasha, an artist, a peer, and a lifelong activist who believes in the power of art to create real change. We were fortunate enough that Natasha actually invited us out to her home in Whitefield, Maine, to not only show a little peek into her life, but also showcase some of the amazing art that she spoke about during her interview. So here is our conversation with Natasha. Good morning, Natasha.
Good
Thank
morning.
you so much for having us in your lovely home today here in beautiful Whitefield, Maine. There's art everywhere, and I absolutely love seeing that. And again, thank you so much for opening your home up and letting us see all the beautiful art that you have here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up and where did you start your journey?
Well, I grew up in Croton-on-Hudson, New York, born in Atlanta, Georgia. My father was a psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, so I came to the world of emotion early. In the mornings, he would often ask us, "So, what did you dream last night?" And we could talk about our dreams. And the very first job that I had as a teenager, I volunteered to work in a summer camp with mentally ill children, and I worked in the art room.
How young were you at this age?
I think I was 15 or 16.
It's just a teenager.
Yeah, and I wasn't paid, and I can't remember if I worked all summer or just a couple of weeks. And I certainly wasn't planning on this as a career. But I thought I would share that little piece of information. And as a child, I was the oldest of 5 kids, and I was always encouraged to make art, and I always had art lessons. And I wasn't a fabulous young artist, but it was something in my life that I loved doing, and my parents always were very encouraging.
That's wonderful that they were encouraging with your art. And it seems like that was something that really drew you to it at a very young age.
And an interesting part of it is that the art teacher I had in my early teens was the only person in the town I thought, or that had built his own house. He had animals. He built stone walls. He was. It was a lifestyle that I loved, and I think that I chose to become an artist later on, partly out of wanting to choose a lifestyle like that. You know, of raising animals and all my own food and building the house. And the other thing about growing up in a family that was uh, very aware of social injustice, I early on worked with prisoners. I was the first woman in the state of Maine to get hired at Thomaston. And I worked with the disabled at Spindleworks. And I worked with um, kids all the way from nursery school up through graduate school. So I've had this range of teaching experiences with different populations.
Yeah, there's quite a range there from youth to seniors. And would you say that the drive, the passion for art is the same throughout those generations, or does it kind of present itself differently?
Well, I've always been interested in trying to get people to express themselves, to reveal themselves in their art, to tell their stories through their art, um, and find that all ages and all kinds of people, whether they have any art training or not, are capable of making fabulous art.
And I think some people may feel that art is more formal than it really is. In that sense, I know for myself, I grew up in school making art and such, but I never really felt like an artist, in the traditional sense. But I've always been drawn to art and making it in different ways. And there's lots of mediums, right? There's painting, and there's a different variety of them. Out of all the mediums of art, what sort of pulled you in as an artist?
Well, early on, I chose the college I went to because it had a woman on the cover welding sculpture. And that's what I did the first year or two when I went to college. But after college, I was still doing a little bit of that, but then I started batiking, making batiks and teaching batik workshops. And
Could you elaborate a little bit more on what batiks are for those who don't know?
yeah, batik is a wax medium. You paint with wax, and then you dip it in dye, and the wax resists the dye, but the wax cracks and makes all these wonderful crackle lines.
Oh, wow. That sounds beautiful.
And you dip it in, and it's very layered, so you do one color at a time. But after that, I started painting, and I was working in a nursery school the year that I started painting, and I loved the kids' art so much that I wanted to paint, because the kids were standing at the easels and painting fabulous paintings. And so I started taking painting, and I've been painting ever since. And I was drawn to working with people who weren't neurotic, normal, quote, normal people. Um, the I wanted to work with people who weren't afraid of revealing themselves, where it came very naturally to reveal oneself in their art. And so I was drawn to working with the consumer population, because their work often, they could translate their feelings directly into visual metaphors and they often had enough trauma and pain to communicate with graphic eloquence uh, their life stories with intensity and immediacy. And that's work that I responded to, and other people were responding to, and they could recognize themselves in that work. So that became that was the population that I ended up working with, prisoners and the disabled, and then consumers with lived experience. I started work in 1974 in AMHI, and I worked there until 81. And from 81 until the pandemic, I worked at Link Social Club, and later on also at the Waterville Social Club, both places.
Let's talk about your time with AmHi a little bit. You had mentioned that you had started there in the 70s. And for those who don't know what AmHi is, it stands for the Augusta Mental Health Institute, which is no longer open, but it is located right on the river, the Kennebec River in Augusta, Maine. And it was there for many, many years as an institution, as a psychiatric hospital. And you had mentioned that you were there, I think you said, for 7 years, working with peers and consumers of mental health. What kind of brought you to working there with AmHi, and what was really striking for you throughout that journey, working with peers?
Well, I had just been working at the prison, and I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, that job was ending. I was also volunteering at the Kennebec County Jail and down at the soup kitchen in Augusta. And I went over to AmHi and I said, I'm willing to volunteer to work with your art therapist, assuming that the big state mental hospital had a art therapist, and they didn't. And so I talked to the occupational therapist, and he hired me to start an art class. Now, luckily, I really wasn't part of that whole paperwork system, bureaucratic system. I didn't have to write reports. I was down the hall, half a mile, it seemed, away from the wards. I could do whatever I wanted with patients there. And we had a wonderful time of making art, making costumes for Halloween. I invited artists in from the community to work with them, and together we painted a lot of walls in the ducts down below the buildings, the very scary ducts. But once there was artwork on the walls, it became less scary.
Quite infamous, the ducks, like you had mentioned. And I think it's well known that there is art down there, but I think what a lot of people don't know is the story behind the art that's down there.
So one of the halls in the down below the buildings was done by at least a dozen artists that I brought in, and each artist had to choose a month, and they painted something about that month's weather or foliage or insects or activities of that month. And then even some poems were painted by AmHi residents on the walls. And when I was there, I wrote a grant we got a grant that I wrote to get a theater person and a writer. And so for a while, it was a very creative atmosphere.
And when it came to the art outside of the physical building, when peers were making art there, what was the response from the residents who were there, who participated in the art? Was this something that people could choose to go and do, or was this more an option available for specific people? And just kind of curious, what was the response, particularly from the residents who were making the art?
Well, I certainly had some very enthusiastic residents who would come every week. Some of them had probably been encouraged to go. Sometimes I would go onto the ward and just announce that there was an art class, and whoever was allowed off the ward could follow me down the hall. Sometimes, like in the locked wards, I would bring art supplies and have an art class on the locked ward, especially in the what do you call it? That's not the medium secure, the maximum security section.
So that's good that you made sure that, folks from different areas of AmHigh could have access to participate in making the art.
Yeah, and I especially loved working on the adolescent unit. I think I mostly set up on that unit, but then some of them were allowed to come to the art room. So long ago, I can't quite remember.
What about the adolescents? And what sort of age range, were those folks in that group?
Well, I can't quite remember if they were allowed to have anybody under 16, but I did.
Okay.
I think I had some 16, 17, 18-year-olds.
So some teenagers,
and,
yep.
And you know what? One of the people I worked with back then grew up and became a regular. So I worked with her for probably 50 years, 45, 50 years. And this is some work I can show you later that she made. And she really had us, over the years, grew in confidence and self-respect and self-love by making art and putting it on display and selling it. And her parents grew very proud of her, and she thought of herself as a famous artist. And actually, one of her drawings was bought by the head of the Whitney Museum in New York City.
Wow. So when it comes to residents there, when they would express themselves through art, you just shared one story. Do any others stand out to you?
I did have a mother and a son, and that was really interesting because they both had a similar diagnosis, and so they were both working out a lot of their relationships through their art.
Were they both at AmHigh together?
Yeah. That was interesting. And I did have a teenager who had run away from home, and I think had probably been used, and she would draw a lot of images of herself without a tongue, without hands, without agency, and gradually, over the course of working with her, she'd get back a little more of those features and until she could I think there was one drawing where she became a lion. And I was not a therapist. I was not trying to psychoanalyze their works or asking them or telling them, the meaning of anything. But if they wanted to talk about it, I was there, certainly, and very interested.
And, were there any folks, and we can kind of also move on to your time with Link, which is a peer center in Augusta, Maine, that works a lot with peers and mental health. And you had mentioned that you had done decades of work there with art. Kind of tell me, did you find anyone, or did you witness anyone find a passion for art through working with them?
Well, definitely. Quite a few of them made art even when we didn't have art class. And some of them have gone on to become full-time artists, like Val. I worked with people who discovered that art was a way to reveal who they were to the rest of the world. Like one fellow was painting for maybe a year or two before he painted himself as a man looking into a mirror, and the mirror reflects back a woman. And he wanted this to hang up in the main room for everybody to see, and it was his way of coming out. And then he was painting himself. This peacock
That's beautiful.
is a self-portrait, where he's beginning to feel pretty good about himself. And this is a self-portrait.
I love that.
And most interesting of all, no, well, it's not most interesting of all, but this is a painting he did.
Wow.
And the collage in there.
Oh, I see it now.
Do you see the photographs from erotic
I see it
magazines?
Now. Wow.
So he's still, he's revealing himself, but in little pieces.
That's a powerful piece.
And this is called Your Heart. And one thing that was very marvelous was for him to show his work and have his family come and see it, because he had never come out to his family. And so it was the gentlest of ways that he could do that.
That's something that's always struck me about making art, is it can, for many folks, it can feel like a very safe place.
Yes.
To physically put their emotions and their feelings and their experience and turn it into something. I'm a writer more so myself than I am an artist, and I get the same sort of satisfying feeling when I'm taking my thoughts and I'm putting them down on paper and I'm creating something from that. And I feel like art, whether it's painting or sculpture or what have you, it is another way where people can safely express themselves and in some cases discover more about themselves.
One of the most interesting exhibits that I ever put together, and it traveled to 11 or 12 locations inside the state and even outside the state, to colleges, to churches, to libraries, to galleries, was called Inside Outside Private Art back in 1987. And the first showing was at what's now University of New England in Portland, in that wonderful white cube of a museum.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And that was the first place it was. And what was exceptional about this show, and it was considered by many people called the best art show of the year, was that all the work was shown anonymously. And half of the artists were adults with mental illness, peers, consumers, and also made up of some disabled artists from Spindleworks, developmentally disabled, and some prisoners from the time I had worked at the state prison. And the other half of the work was well-known, somewhat famous Maine artists, and all the work was shown anonymously, and you really could not tell who was the professional artist
Mom.
and who was somebody who had never had art training. And the way that we did it was I went around to artist studios and I picked out their work that they don't normally show in galleries, the work that's more private, that's more revealing, that's more narrative, that's more, that has some sort of sometimes secrets hidden. And I asked them if I could show that work. So it really was one of the greatest exhibits I ever put together, and it was a wonderful way to help reduce the stigma against people with a diagnosis.
Was that well received in the art community?
God, it was incredibly well received, and then got requests to move it. So I mean, it's pretty unusual to have a show travel to 11, 12 different locations.
Oh wow! What time frame was this?
1987 to 88. Yeah, and we got a big grant from the Maine Humanities Council, And so I could pay some very famous anthropologists and art critics and psychologists and psychiatrists to write articles about the show. So that was pretty cool. So I have this great love for outsider art, for art that's made by people who haven't had art training, because I find that it's more authentic, that it's often more eccentric.
A bit more freeing in that sense because they don't have that training to kind of rail them into a specific piece.
Yeah, and it has more of a sense of urgency because it's more about their lived experience. I find it more mysterious sometimes. I find that it's not trying to fit current fashion. It's not trying to be pretty. Well, oftentimes the prisoner's work often was made to please somebody, but the outside of the prison context, usually not. So didn't run into that problem.
What brought you to the Link Center, and what did that look like for you working with artists and with peers, really?
Well, I can't quite remember, but I think the AmHi ran out of funding for the art program, and motivational services was just beginning. And I had an acquaintance in the area who knew about me and was helping to set up motivational services. So I think that was how I started. Also, I had just had a baby, and I remembered putting Noah on my back in a backpack and going off to class.
Coming along with you.
Yeah, he was born in 81, so that's when I started motivational services.
When that first got started, what did that look like?
Right from the get-go, I had a wonderful array of art supplies. So all kinds of materials for drawing in different medium, and then acrylic paints and tempera paints and clay and all sizes and colors of paper. And I often found that to start somebody, if they were very hesitant, I would give them a black piece of construction paper with pastels, and I'd say, well, just take a line for a walk and see where it goes, and just keep it going and keep changing colors. And it almost always worked because pastel on black construction paper looks really good. So
I can see that in my mind's eye, yeah.
So people usually felt pretty good about what they were doing and didn't reject what they were doing right off. And then as people got more confident, I'd encourage them to try some other medium. But you're asking me questions about...
I know, I'm testing the memory here.
About a long time ago. I'm 79 years old now. The other thing that I was doing and that I didn't mention was I had many years of going school to school in the state of Maine as an artist in residence with the Maine Arts Commission. And I supervised probably about 400 or 500 murals around the state. So I had this vast experience of doing community murals and working with large groups of students to paint murals directly on school walls and on panels. So I knew how to get groups working together. But it was very satisfying to work individually with people. I'm in a group setting, but to have them make their own work, because each person's work was so different, and I didn't set up an assignment. I didn't set up a still life. Maybe sometimes I did if somebody wanted one. I was just trying to get each person to make art about what they needed to make art about, and it was almost always successful. And then, of course, I have quite a network of friends and people in the art world, and I wanted clients and peers to feel like their work was enjoyed outside of the club, that it wasn't just me saying, hey, this is really nice work you're doing. And I wanted them to be able to earn some money. And so I worked to get some very fancy schmancy galleries to show their work. One on Vinyl Haven, one at the Center for Maine Community Art in Rockland, that used to be the main Center of Art, MCA, used to be in Rockport, and they had an exhibit of the work in the downstairs, so that everybody going to see this famous art gallery would also see this work. And then we had a show that was to raise money for that organization, but mostly to raise money for the artist I worked with, that was shown in Camden, and drew hundreds and hundreds of people and made thousands of dollars.
That's incredible.
I think that particular show made $9,000 or $10,000. I mean, it was a lot.
A lot of artists down in Camden. A lot of artists.
Well, it's a summer crowd too.
Oh yes. Yep, summers in Maine. I know we just spoke about the Link Center and that work there. So as you've been working with peers in that community way, how has that influenced your own work?
Well, my own work has been influenced by the people I've worked with. For years, I pretty much tried to hide myself in my art. I would write something sometimes on the canvas and then paint over it. And at one point, at that time I felt, oh, that's kind of professional thing to do. You don't show all your secrets. And then when my father died and I became pregnant, my drawings turned into maps and my marks were more invested with meaning. It took me many years before I allowed myself to be more personal and self-revealing, like people I was working with. And sometimes, and I would started letting myself become more eccentric, more childish in my work, and certainly more angry and more political. And ultimately, I felt that working all these years with peers made my work more honest and intense.
And when you say more intense, could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Intensity meaning the topics that you were exploring, or just in how you were expressing yourself through your art, or maybe both?
Yeah, it's both. It's both. And then at times my work has been very personal. There was a time before I got divorced when I was scratching away at sgraffito, which is black ink on a chalk on a kind of a clay coated paper, and I was sitting there for months scratching away on it, trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do? And images would appear and help me decide to get a divorce. Like I would see a bird leaving a cage, or I would see a table and a chair being knocked and a lamp being knocked over, or I would see that somehow I was working out what are the reasons for leaving. And then there was a period when I had just gone through some very angry outbursts from my ex-husband, and we had been traveling in Mexico, and we saw these skulls all lined up facing the same direction. But when I came home, I was making paintings of these skulls facing each other, and these marks, angry marks, leaving their mouths. And so there have been times when my work was quite self-therapeutic.
And self-revealing, right? Kind of interpreting the messages that you were getting while creating the art itself.
Yeah, and that particular body of work was shown at that good gallery in Camden, And my favorite response to it was when somebody, I was there and somebody walked up the stairs into the room and laughed, and within 20 seconds was crying. That it had that kind of response of at first it looked very kind of funny, and but then it was like it went right. She got it. She could really understand what it was about.
And that connection that you can have through, like you said, people revealing pieces of themselves, which is very personal, right? But that journey that you go on and that expression can also really heavily impact those who are viewing your art, who may be going through something similar or something adjacent, and they can kind of identify pieces of themselves or their journey in your art. I think that's powerful. One of the most powerful things about art in general, but especially when it comes to mental health recovery. So you'd mentioned, that particular time in your life when you were making that art through your divorce. And have there been any other particular pieces or arts events that you've done where it really sticks out to you in your memory as being like a huge part of your personal journey as an artist?
Well, everything I do has been pretty major, pretty epic. Uh, at different times in my life, different projects, but the most recent one, just this week, was the 4th of July parade, and I've been organizing them in the Whitefield parade since the mid 80s. And they're always very political or satirical. They're usually quite funny, but the situation in the world right now is so dire that I had to make it a little less funny this year. But because things are so horrible right now, a lot of people wanted to be in it. And so we had 42 people in my parade float this year. And this theme is This What We Voted For? And we had more than 22 issues represented by props and banners, and people were marching. And there was a clown who was spinning a wheel that was like a wheel of misfortunes, and she was prancing and reading those out. And then there was somebody with big eyeballs on his top of his hat, 3 big eyeballs, and with a sign in front that said, "I see you, I hear you." And that was about surveillance. There was a weather reporter, weather forecaster, now that there's cuts to NOAA and FEMA, and she had a crystal ball in one hand and an 8-ball in the other, and she was giving forecasts from the 8-ball and the crystal ball, because now weather forecasting's been cut. And there was a guy in a Johnny walking with a walker and with a banner behind him about all the cuts to Maine care and health care. And there was a Supreme Court judge in a black gown with a red MAGA tie and a big MAGA pin and a MAGA hat with a giant mallet that said SCOTUS on it. And there were 22 different things like that. And, marching in a 4th of July parade. That's my way of making satire and getting my anger out. Just for an example, there was one day when I just felt just in too much despair, mostly about Gaza. And I sat at the table making cardboard handcuffs and paper chains to hold them together. And doing something creative and eccentric like that helped me get through the day. Now, I wasn't just making that to make it handcuffs. I was going to have some people who were representing ICE, the new secret police, so I wanted to make handcuffs for them. But anyway, what I want to say about things is that being a creative person and being an artist, it gives me a voice. It gives me actions to do. It gives me a way to communicate immediately. It gives me a way to get other people involved. That's a big deal to get 42 people in town to march in the parade doing something that in the past they would have thought controversial.
I've probably been to one of those parades on the 4th of July. If you've been doing them for so long, I guarantee you I've seen some of your pieces. And actually, this kind of brings me to the art, ARRT. Talk a little bit about that to folks who may not know what art is. How did that get started, and what is it that art does?
Well, about 12 years ago, I invited some other artists to come together and form Artist Rapid Response Team. And we met once a month in Brunswick. Somebody let us use their big, beautiful studio in Fort Andros. Later, we moved to a wonderful, big, beautiful spot in the Bodenham Historical Society's building in Bodenham. And over the years, we have painted, we've lost track, 400, 500, 600 banners for all our progressive groups in the state that we cared about, issues that we cared about. Sometimes we reach out to the organization, and sometimes they reach out to us. Supposedly, they need to be nonprofits, but sometimes we'll work with smaller groups. And our purpose right from the get-go was to make art without words, or where words came second. And the visual image was what captured people's attention. And do it without any cost to the organization. We wanted to be like their artist in residence, because we knew they wouldn't, none of those groups had artists who could visualize what they were doing and make it speak to a wider audience. And it was a way to help them get attention, because the newspapers and the reporters, whoever showed up, would almost always include the visual if people were marching with that banner, or if they had a press conference and held up the banner. So it was a way for us to help them get their message across. And over the years, we got some funding, so we were able to pay artists a very small stipend and pay their gas. And then we could pay rent, and we could buy lunch and supplies. And over the years, we've invited the organizations more and more to come to our session and brainstorm with us and paint with us. And we like that buy-in of people coming and working with us. Like, for example, the women's domestic violence group, Finding Our Voices, came and brought, I think, six of their members came, and they were planning a march and a demonstration in Lewiston on Valentine's Day. And so they came and made a banner with us and lots of placards. And we've had different women's groups come at different times, the gun violence groups, and then the ones who are fighting for abortion rights. And sometimes as many as 15 members of a organization will come, and we help them paint. We give them ideas. We coach them to make it better and better.
It truly is a collaborative process.
Yes,
when you're working with organizations, which I love.
And it's a collaborative process for us working with other artists. The first year, we all signed the work, and especially if we were the designer of that particular image. And after that first year, none of us signed it. It was totally a collaborative effort. We were proud of it as a collaborative. We didn't need to take ownership of anything.
But also having that ARRT tag on there, right, shows, like, if someone sees those banners and they're like, wow, how did they come up with that? How did that come to be? And they can I'm sure word of mouth over the years has also been a big part of how you've connected with different organizations as well.
Yeah, and if you've ever been to the Common Ground Fair, oftentimes there's 5, 6, 8 different banners in the tents. The different organizations will put them up to advertise their group.
I have seen those banners, and I hadn't put that 2 and 2 together before. What would you say to mental health peers who might be exploring creativity or art as a way to express themselves? What would you say to those folks who either have no experience making art or very little experience making art? What would you say to them initially?
Well, I told you before a little bit about pastels on black paper as a way to get people started. I found that really works. And I'll give the advice of, like, just don't criticize yourself, don't be critical, and also don't expect everything to look great. Just keep making things, and then you can go back in later when you see it doesn't look great to you. You can so-called add stuff to it. You can cover over it. I didn't let people use erasers. And I also didn't give people a skinny little pencil to draw with. I find with paint, if you start somebody off with a fairly big brush, they're more expressive than if they're trying to be
more detailed
and really careful. I didn't ever censor work or tell them they couldn't make work about something. I didn't tell people what they had to draw. And that Paul Klee admonition to take a line for a walk is a really good way to get somebody to make a mark. But I'm also a bit of a fascist artist. I remember early on saying, I don't want to see any white paper left.
Yep.
You got to fill this up. If you want white, you have to paint white in a painting. And I often I think in the early years, when we were painting murals with kids, I would say no black. Because in a group work, if one person's using black, that's the first thing you see, and that's all you see. So I often would push people, coach people. Maybe it was pushing, maybe it was coaching.
It could be interchangeable there.
Yeah, to make something richer. Add, the space looks empty. What could you do to make this stand out more? So I was dealing with non-artists the same way I was dealing, say, with college kids when I was teaching at UMA. I would make the same kinds of demands often, or the same suggestions, because I'm an artist, and I know what a great piece of art looks like. And if something was halfway there, I would try to coach somebody to keep going with it. I think that's my style. That's who I am. But I also, I also recognize when something simple is, finished. I'm not going to tell him to fill in the rest of this picture. That was enough. That was the impetus to make that, and I wasn't going to do more. Or I never would tell Ruth what to do, because she was always doing something wonderful. She was more expressive than I could ever be in her work. I wasn't going to say fill in the back of that. I think I might have given her the glitter.
That's a wonderful piece.
Yeah. Or, something that I was good at was when somebody was stuck, or were a little bored with something, Or if they'd already done 100 watercolor drawings, I'd give them a new medium. So this is glass. So
Oh, wow.
so then for a couple of weeks, she was excited to paint her little portraits on glass, and they're wonderful.
Those are wonderful.
So I was often bringing in a new technique to stimulate even more ways of expressing oneself. What was the original question?
No, you answered it. It was just, you know, I, what was my question?
How would you kind of
Oh,
bring a non-artist
right. If they ask that question, how do I get started? Yeah, that's right. That's right. Thank you.
And I probably was successful at getting most of the Link Club and the Waterville Social Club members to at least try it.
So, what is next for you? What's next for art? Is there anything upcoming that you're particularly excited about and would like to share with our listeners?
Well, that parade is still on my mind, and it's going out on social media. In the last 2 days, the video of it's gotten 600 hits.
I'll have to take a look at it.
Yeah, so that's on my mind right now. I don't have a plan for the future. I've been standing out for pro-Palestine rallies. I'll make more work for these ad boxes that we've been filling in Brooklyn, New York. My artist rapid response team group does not meet in the summer, but I'm beginning to put together the agenda for the fall. My own work, it's interesting right now. I haven't gone through such a long period without making my own work. I've been making some of these ad box paintings about issues, but I go out to my studio and I just, with things being so dire in the world and so desperate, I can't make any sweet little collages. And I've also made so many paintings over the years that I didn't talk about violence in Central America, about victims here in this country, in Iraq, Afghanistan. So a lot of work over 30, 40 years has been about the disappeared, about people, victims of war. And I've made enough work. At some point, I did wake up a couple of years ago and I woke up and got out of bed and I said, I've done enough. I have any more ambition to become more famous, to get on the cover of the big art magazines, to I stopped adding to my resume. It was already, umpteen pages long. And so I keep making work, but I don't have this impetus to put together a huge body of work. My last big show was at the Maine Jewish Museum. I can't remember if it was 3 years ago, and it was about some of the work. Some of the work started out as very sweet swimmers, bathers on the beach in Old Orchard Beach, and soon it turned into piles of bodies, and then bigger piles of bodies, and I seem to and lately, the last couple of years, I've done a lot of prints, monotypes, and collages with a lot of falling bodies. And Gaza, I can't get over Gaza and making work about that. And now I'm making work about ICE and immigrant. We've done a lot of I didn't finish telling you about Artist Rapid Response Team, but a lot of our work is rapid response to what's happening right now. So we've made a lot of work for immigrant groups, and we've made a lot of work about healthcare and about education cuts. And we'll continue to do that. And more of our work lately, I think, will be more sculptural, more props. Um, and we certainly are making a lot of placards now because there's so many rallies. Uh, but one of the things that's changed over the years is really interesting is when we first started out, we made a lot of placards for different groups, and people were not making their own work. But as soon as Trump was elected in 2016, at the Women's March, that was the big turning point of people wanting to make their own placards, their own statements, even if they were pretty lousy art or even if they were pretty illegible. A lot more people wanted to make their own.
And that's, you've kind of touched upon that as we've spoken this whole time too, is that art can really, and it goes well to the title of Art Rapid Response, right? It's a response, and it's a response to the climate that we're in, and what's impacting the communities that you work so closely with and the people around you. And, you had mentioned folks from different countries, right? That may not impact you directly, but as someone who is an artist, you're like, this is something that I can do to speak up about it and to show that to people and to stop and to think about it. And I'm very excited to kind of see where art, ARRT, and yourself and your own art goes when it comes to how things will change. We're in a very unique political climate right now, in the United States and in our state as well. So as time moves on, I'm curious how art will continue to play a role in activism and getting that word out there.
Well, one thing that's been happening is that our group is growing. Since this last election, we went from about 10 people averaging from our group or core group to now our core group is up to 14 or 15 plus more. So sometimes we've had as many as 25 people coming to a session. And that's growing. And things are getting so bleak and bad that the last session we had, it felt like everybody was using fluorescent paint to be as bright and cheery and colorful. And everybody was just kind of joyous during the day just to get together in the midst of the horrors out there. And I was very funny. I said to two of the regulars, I said, can't you use more adult paint? Adult colors, I called it. This is kind of looking like nursery school.
But that really does kind of exemplify it, right? That they're using those bold colors in a time where your response, the words that you say, how you activate needs to be bold in response.
Yeah, but and also because things are so black right now that to use that kind of color makes you feel good too. But yeah, definitely to get more attention. And so art will be growing by leaps and bounds. A artist rapid response team group started in Brooklyn, New York in January. It's been meeting.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
And they've been doing work that's a little bit more anti-fascist and more political, more out there. A little, like they do graffiti. We don't do graffiti. They do a lot with the ad boxes. They do a lot with stickers, and almost all of them are under the age of 40. So it's a different focus, but they're doing a lot of what we do too.
So, as I've mentioned before, as we kind of wrap up our conversation, we'll definitely have links and information to a lot that we've talked about today, including visual representations of the art that was mentioned today. But do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, I think it's criminal not to have a regular art program in the consumer centers.
And like like we spoke about today, that is really impactful for peers to be able to express themselves. And I know a lot of the peer centers do a lot of informal art in that sense, where there isn't like a specific class that comes in and teaches you on a regular basis. But art is still very much a huge part of recovery for a lot of our peers. And a lot of what we talked about today, I think they'll really appreciate hearing that there was a massive appetite for it at one time. And perhaps this is something that we can bring back to the peer centers on a more regular, formal basis.
Yeah, it needs some funding and commitment, and it needs recognition that it's a important, crucial activity for some people.
It really can be. And you had mentioned a few folks where art was the crux of their recovery. And then it had a huge impact on their future lives.
And their families.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Natasha, for your time with us today. We'll definitely have all the information in the show notes. And again, thank you. We'll be showcasing some of that work here as we move forward.
Thank you.
If you're listening and you have a story to share, we want to hear from you. Whether you're a peer with lived experience or someone doing advocacy work in the community, we invite you to apply to be a guest. Your voice matters, and this space was made for you. This podcast would not be possible without the amazing podcast team. Special thanks to Carrie Pitts and Brittany Lawrence, who helped make this podcast possible. And an extra special thank you to Brittany Lawrence for co-hosting today's episode. You can find resources and links in the show notes of this episode. You can also stay updated by visiting our website, Facebook, and Instagram, along with subscribing to our email updates. Search for Our Voice of Maine or Our Voice of ME online, and you'll find us. Thank you again for listening. We hope that you'll join us again, follow along, and maybe even share your story too. Until next time, keep speaking, keep listening, and keep showing up, because your voice matters. The CCSM is an independent public instrumentality and provides a nonpartisan and non-biased perspective on any topic we speak on. Our goal is to represent the voice of people with lived experience with mental health challenges in public policy and legislative matters.